Hello and welcome once again to Composition 2, Section 3004. We're here for Session 17 on this wonderful Thursday, October 15th. And I, as always, am your inimitable host, Mr. Fowler, ready to guide you on a path of learning. Learning what? Well, we'll get to that real shortly. Okay. For today's agenda, things are going to be a little bit different. So let's get right into it. I'm going to use the share screen function and get started on our typical PowerPoint. I'll also be posting this PowerPoint for your own record purposes as we progress. So I'm going to use my slideshow from the beginning. There we are. So for today's session, of course, we're going to start with a little bit of a preview, focusing on or refreshing ourselves over the long chapter 5 of The Princess Bride. That will take about 10 minutes out of our time today. But I feel that if you have been watching these videos and maybe the sound has cut out, or there has been an issue with the audio and you missed certain content, that you're going to want to have this refresher. So I'll minimize it, focusing on the information as quickly as I can. Then we're going to have a short or miniature writing workshop today, in which I set up how to structure a persuasive essay, which is the next step in the process. We've introduced it. This week we're doing a little bit of research on it, and we're going to talk about that today. And then I want to wrap up with just talking to some of you about the midterm assessment, because midterms are upon us. And I think a lot of you who've been working diligently are going to be just fine, and you're going to kind of scratch your head, and you may want to even leave the video a little bit earlier. And that's fine. It may just be a 50-minute session for you, most of you today. But there are some of you who I'm sure are intelligent enough to realize the reality of where we're at mid-semester. So take that with a grain of salt. Your mileage may vary on the last 20 minutes, but it needs to be addressed. And that's something that's not my favorite point of the semester, but it comes up at this point every semester, whether it's fall or spring or summer. So we need to make sure that we have time to address some of those issues. Okay, let's move ahead, shall we? So today we're going to take a look, like I said, at the writing workshop, focusing on the persuasive essay. But before we get to that, let's review Chapter 5 of our text, The Princess Bride by William Goldman. Little factoid here for you. During the filming of The Princess Bride, the actor playing Count Rugen, Christopher Guest, aka Mr. Jamie Lee Curtis, inadvertently knocked Carrie Ills, Wesley, or the Man in Black, out, knocked him unconscious when he tapped him in the head too hard with the butt of his sword. The scene of Wesley falling to the ground unconscious is real. So I thought that was an interesting little moment. Okay, again, this was a long chapter. So in this chapter, we round out the principal cast of characters, including our introductions to Fezzik the fighter, or Fezzik the giant, and Inigo and Montoya the swordsman. Now, together with Vizzini, the hunchback, the three men kidnap Buttercup. And we learn that this is all part of a plan staged by Buttercup's beau-to-be, Prince Humperdinck. The kidnappers, Fezzik, Inigo, and Vizzini, are all strikingly visually different, but also we learn that Fezzik and Inigo seem to also be in this scheme for money. So their heart is not in the violence intended for Buttercup. But for Vizzini, who is a hired assassin, things go a little bit differently. The idea is hatched by Humperdinck himself so that he can go to war with Gilder. Buttercup endears herself to the common folk of Florin. And he says this couldn't be any better because now that they have sympathy for, now that they have an adoration of Buttercup as their princess, if she dies or is murdered and her body is left on the Gilder frontier, he will have finally the inspiration that he needs to go to war with Gilder. And we know from the book that Gilder and Florin actually survive in sort of a symbiotic relationship by going to war with one another for various reasons. So this is yet another reason to go to war with neighboring Gilder. But the man in black has other plans. He doesn't believe Buttercup's life should be forfeit, so he tirelessly pursues the three kidnappers, defeating each in turn. He bests to meet Inigo Montoya because he's, I don't know if he's more studied or Montoya's heart just isn't in the battle, but he uses his wits and his strength to best Inigo Montoya. Then he uses his ingenuity and competitiveness, his tireless mind to find a way to defeat the immovable object. So you have the irresistible force in the man in black and the immovable object in Fezzik, and he's able to, through his determination, actually defeat the unbeatable foe. However, after he rescued, then of course, oh, I forgot, jumped ahead there. And of course, with Vizzini, he outfoxes him, relying again on his constitution. He's developed an immunity to the poison he pours into both glasses, and therefore outfoxes the wise man. But upon rescuing Buttercup, he sort of picks at her emotionally, and actually treats her worse than the kidnappers who initially stole her away from the Florinese countryside. At one point, Buttercup simply reaches her fill. She's had enough. And as such, she takes advantage of the man in black spying the arrival of the Florinese armada, which does make him nervous. But while he's distracted, she shoves him off of a steep ravine, only to hear him say, "As you wish," as he falls to the floor. Once she, of course, realizes that the man in black is Wesley, she flings herself after him in kind of one of the more comedic moments in the book and the film adaptation. And the two are reunited on the floor of the ravine. As they make their way toward the fire swamp, Wesley explains that over the past 3 years, he has been absent due to having to take up the mantle of the Dread Pirate Roberts, which he reveals is simply a title that's exchanged from one former Dread Pirate Roberts to the next or new fellow in the line of procession. Now, he knows that he's going to have to cut through the fire swamp because his ship, the Revenge, is anchored on the other side. And it's the quickest way from point A to point B. But the fire swamp is incredibly dangerous, and in fact is actually a nightmarish place that causes the children of Florin and Gilder to sort of behave. But nevertheless, it still is a particularly deadly area. Now, as they enter the fire swamp, the Florinese armada moves in on the Revenge, causing the ship to have to pull up anchor. Wesley must have had some sort of crew still attending to the ship. So they pull up anchor and take off because one ship can't defeat an entire armada no matter how fast or able it is. As such, they're left essentially stranded. So when they emerge from the dangers of the fire swamp, when they defeat the rats of unusual size, survive being singed by the fire pits, the sulfurous fire pits, and escape the suffocating pull of the snow sand, called lightning sand in the film. They emerge from the fire, the fire swamp, only to come face to face with Count Rugen, Prince Humperdinck, and a whole squadron of men. Wesley, of course, refuses to back down. But the fact of the matter is that even Wesley, having exhausted himself and with the battle against Inigo, straining his ability to defeat Fezzik, and then enduring a tad bit of poison, admits that he's a little bit, shall we say, winded at this point. They've also tried to run away from the pursuit of Prince Humperdinck and his hunting party. And in the fire swamp, he's actually attacked by one of the rats of unusual size and bitten pretty badly. So even in the face of these incredible odds, he is determined that he will not be separated from Buttercup, that he'll fight to the death if need be. But Buttercup, having endured kidnapping, almost being eaten by sharks, being kidnapped again, having flung herself to the bottom of a ravine and being forced to run for several miles in the nighttime, decides that, you know what, one arduous encounter for a day is enough. She says, look, if life can return to what it was one dusk ago, I'll go with you, meaning Prince Humperdinck, and you will simply need to agree to let Wesley live, or let him go, because he saved me from my original kidnappers. If you do that, I'll return with you to Florin with no objection whatsoever. So now again, Wesley is aware probably at this point that the Florinese armada has already chased away the ship, the Revenge. But maybe Buttercup just doesn't think about this or consider this in the moment. So she agrees to go with Humperdinck. He in turn agrees to release Wesley, and the two ride off together on one of his famous white stallions. Wesley, of course, immediately knows the truth of the situation, that he'll most likely be killed or tortured, or, as it will turn out, spoiler, both. But just before he's clubbed into unconsciousness, he doesn't have time to note that Count Rugen has 6 fingers on his right hand, which means he's the 6-fingered man that Inigo Montoya had been searching for all these years. Okay, so that's a nice summation. Let me check my time. I think I did a pretty good job there. Not too bad, maybe a little bit longer than I anticipated. But now it's time to move on to something completely different, meaning let's discuss how to begin the persuasive essay. I'm going to stop share for a moment. Okay, so let's go ahead and refresh ourselves on the persuasive essay. What is included in it? In fact, I'm also going to, hold on, before I do that, I'm going to stop my video feed because you won't need to see me as much as you'll need to hear me. Okay. There we go. Sorry for that delay. We already know that for the persuasive essay, you have a due date of the end of the month, about 2 weeks' time, essentially, from when this video is posted. It's a little bit higher in terms of points because the requirements are also a bit higher. This time you have to write about 850 words, which is closer to 3.5 than 4 pages, but I put the tilde there because it's equivalent or about roughly 4 pages. And I think 4 is an easier mental image to encapsulate than 3.5. You do need to maintain the same format as for the ad analysis, but this time you should arrive at 2 authoritative sources that you can use to establish your position. Now, why 2? Well, I'll give you the easy answer and I'll give you the professorial answer. 2 materials or 2 sources Of course, you can always use more, but 2 sources, I think, balance out a 3.5-page essay relatively well. But the true answer is that you should use as many or as few sources as you need to persuade your audience of your perspective. Now, as Kisner and Mandel, writing in Practical Argument, state, influencing an audience to adopt a particular belief or to follow a specific course of action is what's asked of writers who are constructing a persuasive essay. Furthermore, persuading your reader of a particular position about some of the larger issues or themes that we've discussed this semester will require you to reflect on the rhetorical situation once again, finding the best appeal for a specific audience that you have in mind. And so we have a number of sample topics. Now for today's activity, I'm going to select one of these topics and simply go after the narrative idea and see how well I can do with a limited amount of time. I'm going to look at this one. Is Goldman's portrayal, oops, I don't know why that one I would, is Goldman's portrayal of Buttercup misogynistic? And is there a pattern in the way that women are portrayed in The Princess Bride, all the way from starlet Sandy Sterling in the introduction, to Goldman's psychoanalyst wife Helen, to Valerie, the wife of Miracle Max? So I think that'll be an interesting topic. Let's see how it goes. I'm going to open a new document, and I'm going to go back to share because it's having a little bit of trouble with that. Okay, so here we go. First thing I'm going to do is type in student's name. I'm going to type in English, or actually I'm going to call it composition 2, and I'm going to use section 3004. Because that, after all, is our Tuesday, Thursday online section number. And then I'm going to write down that it is the persuasive essay. And I'm going to write in the due date, October 30th, 2020, not 2002. We're not going to go back in time. I can ask a lot of you. I can't ask you to go back in time. Okay, first of all, I'm going to make that a single instead of a multiple. Then I'm going to click up here into the header, and I'm going to select top page, line number 3, which is on the right justified side. I'm going to highlight that number, go back to the home section, and select, of course, times 11 and size 12, and I'm going to do the same here. Size 12 times the run. Okay, I'm going to hit enter. Then I'm going to center this, and I'm going to sub in title here, because one of the last things I do every time I write is create a title. That's usually the very final thing I do. So I'm going to hit enter or return. Does anybody have a keyboard that says return anymore? I think they all say enter now. So anyway, I'm going to click enter. I'm going to go back and justify this from center to left margin. And then I'm going to use my tab key to begin my first paragraph. Now, I'm also going to take a moment to select double space and then click OK. So now the paper will be double spaced with the appropriate margins. And it's all laid out perfectly according to the ways that it should be in each of our assignment rubrics or essay assignment. So again, I've often stressed that I think for writing a persuasive paper, an inductive approach, starting with a very specific point and using more generalized examples, so starting with specific, moving to example, is maybe a better way to structure this particular essay. And then so then I'll start with the following. William Goldman began writing shortly after he completed his undergraduate degree in college. Such a level of success was rare, even in his time. Perhaps it is this level of early success that spoiled him. When I say spoiled, I mean to suggest, I mean to suggest, see, even Mr. Fowler makes a mistake now. When I say spoiled, I mean to suggest that Goldman was able to keep writing under some of the premises that a 20-year-old man, we'll say 22, now I have to go back and check that, a 22-year-old man, and I'm going to change premises to whimsy. Is prone to which now why didn't I say prone to? Well, remember that to is a preposition, and if you're trying to achieve the most formal style of writing, you should try to never end a sentence with a preposition. Now, there are some people who suggest, and I actually agree with this, that not ending a sentence with a preposition is a bit stilted in terms of writing. But some people also profess that writing the most articulate style, or writing in the most grammatically appropriate style, or under the most grammatically appropriate conditions, can actually help you as a developing or burgeoning writer. That way, when you want to bring some artifice into the style of your writing, you can know how to safely break with convention to create a particular impact. Okay. Now, I'm going to have to say 22. I don't know if he was 22, so I'm going to put that in italics, not because I need to grammatically, but because that's a reminder for me later to go back and check my facts on that. Now, clearly, I do know a little bit more about Goldman from reading the introduction and the postscript of the book, and I also have done a little bit of research about him in advance of teaching this course. So this is pretty common knowledge, and I'm also not going to dwell on it, so I don't think this is a time for me to use a source to back anything up. I haven't made any essential statements just yet. This includes the propensity for treating women, for treating, I don't know about that's true, so I don't want to slander him, for treating his female characters horribly. Specifically, Goldman seems to vent a lot of frustration about relationships through his work. While it's true that this may be seen as a positive way of releasing negative energy through art. His work on the famous novel The Princess Bride does contribute, or I would say, let's not say does, but contributes to the problems of 20th century art, contributes to one of the main problems manifest in 20th century art. Specifically, Goldman's text contributes to the misogynistic treatment of women in 20th century literature. Okay, obviously you need to do a little spell check here. Okay, it was a Y, not I. Okay, so now I have something approaching a fairly good thesis statement, which I'll highlight in blue. So let's count and see how many sentences we have. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, more than enough sentences leading to something akin to a critical thesis statement. So now, sorry, a little typo there. Now we have a pretty good introductory paragraph. Is it the best paragraph I've written in my life? Clearly not, but it goes to show that starting with a broad statement and a clearly defined thesis can help you set the table for what it is you want to say in the format of a persuasive essay, using, of course, again, that inductive method of setting up a paper. We also burned through 151 words, just contributing to that first paragraph. So we're now down to 750 words left, right? So that's a little bit more than 2 pages. Okay. Goldman is not a first-time offender either. His early novels, and I'm turning some pages here in the book to remind myself of something. Okay. boys and girls together. Is mentioned by poolside starlet Sandy Sterling in is it the opening chapter? I think it is. I think it's you can hear me turning pages in the microphone probably. Yeah. As mentioned by Sandy Sterling in the initial chapter of The Princess Bride. This book, we are told in the introduction, received a particularly harsh reception from critics. Now, while it is clear that Sandy Sterling, a fictional movie starlet, loves Goldman's, repudiated novel, the way in which he goes about describing Sterling is very telling of how the dual functions of physical beauty and emotional stunted development will inform many of the major characters throughout the novel. Okay, so let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so we can spend a little bit more time on that. Before he even meets Sterling, he relates a telephone conversation with his wife, or with his psychoanalyst wife, Helen. Goldman writes that every call ends with, and I have to do a little bit of focusing here, no starlets now. And now she doesn't. Oh, and again we have end quote, parentheses 15, because we already named Goldman as the author, so that is implied that it comes from page 15, and period at the end. Okay. He is feeling remarkably guilty over his discussions with Sterling, who he describes as, I'm going to go back and find the terminology here. It's not the worst in the world, but it's not exactly flattering. Okay, here you go. As gorgeous. Chapter or page 13. See here. I thought there was a as gorgeous. Well, okay, yeah, he describes her as gorgeous and goes on to explain that she is essentially an ideal, an idealized woman, a physical, that she is a physical ideal. This, of course, is in clear reference to his cunning and calculating wife, Helen, she, like the character of Vizzini, seems to know what Goldman is thinking before he thinks it, even from a distance of thousands of miles. On the surface, this entire exchange is comedic and whimsical. However, it is important to consider that it is all a complete fiction. In point of fact, Goldman's wife was a former model and quite physically striking. This, of course, did not ensure that his marriage would work out either. In fact, he divorced his wife with whom he had 2 daughters, not a son, and remarried sometime later. One must guess, or one may conclude, that Goldman's conflation of a psychoanalyst wife who has who knows all and seems to always have the best advice in mind, or together with the Hollywood starlet, is an attempt to fashion what he wanted in an ideal partner. However, his bitterness also seems to manifest. He explains in the first chapter that Helen, his fictional wife, would eventually leave him. Within the context of this story, the relationship between the fictional Goldman and his fictional wife, Helen, underscores the rest of the relationships in the novel. Let's just say relationships. Let's say, okay. The first lines of the story, or Goldman's version, tell about or describes the quote, most beautiful woman in the world at the time of the birth of Buttercup, the titular character. Interestingly, from the outset, from the beginning, women are denoted primarily for their physical beauty. This is an example of the classic theory of the male gaze, termed by I can't remember who termed that. I think it was Pauline Kael. I'm going to put italics on that. Who created the male gaze? Term male gaze. According to this theory, women depicted in media are always subject to the way male creators and authors view them. This establishes a precedent in media and the larger culture, for the terms and conditions by which women are valued and judged by men and by other women. So let's see. Chapter 1, The Princess Bride. Right? The French scullery maid Annette is suspected by her employer, the Countess de Guiche, Guiche, as sleeping with her husband. the Countess quickly discovers Annette's A-N-N-E-T-E, Annette's penchant for chocolate, which she uses to fatten up her erstwhile competition. This backfires, though. Ultimately, she only chases her husband into the arms of her own mother, getting an ulcer for her trouble. Okay, so we've written a pretty long paragraph here. So we'll start a new paragraph. And we've also clocked in at 661 words. So this is a pretty intense start to an essay. So we've got about 200 words left, or thereabout, a little under 200 words to play with to wrap things up. And you can say the condition for women doesn't really improve beyond this point. Buttercup's own parents are backbiting and argumentative. Let's just say are argumentative. Their relationship informs Buttercup's own dealings with the opposite sex. Because her mother tends to henpick her husband, Buttercup attempts to do the same to the farm boy, Wesley, rather than admit that she is attracted to him. This kind of behavior is traditionally assigned to young boys who physically pick at girls they are attracted to due to a lack of social grace or social capability in the developmental years. In Golden's novel, this system is reversed. It is Buttercup who seems childlike or childish and reprehensible, and Wesley, who is presented as genuine, intelligent, and considered. Now, to Goldman's credit, this swapping of traditional gender roles could be defended as innovative for the time, 1973. Notice there that I paused long enough to give a slight refutation to even my own perspective. So I'm going to consider, maybe he did that intentionally to sort of twist the perspective of the reader around and defy their expectations. But I don't think he actually did that. Or at least I'm going to argue that he didn't do that. Still, Buttercup is consistently depicted as haughty, thoughtless, or let's say not thoughtless, but careless. Haughty, careless, and vain. It is not until she begins to mourn the loss of Wesley that she comes into her full beauty and begins to exhibit characteristics of a protagonist contemporary audiences can feel comfortable with or can relate to. To whom can relate. Okay. And again, quick grammar lesson, who versus whom. You use who whenever a verb follows it. If we have, what do we have following who here? Whom, contemporary is an adjective. So if there's another word form beyond a verb, then you use whom. So that's a little bit easier than people, I think, sometimes consider. Okay. So now we're down to 831 words. So we've only got about 20 words to play with here. One must assume that the reason Goldman reacts in such a manner is due to his disdain for women and the roles they play in dynamic relationships. Disdain. This is further, or this jaded perspective is further evidenced by the relationship between Valerie, the wife of Miracle Max, and the king's former wise man. Now this, I should pause right here and say something. I'm going to be getting into territory that you are familiar with if you've seen the film adaptation, but if you've never read the book and you've never seen the film, this might be a slight spoiler. Now, we've already had mention of Miracle Max, but this is going to talk a little bit about what's revealed coming up in chapter 6. So just wanted to give you a fair warning. Max recently dismissed by Prince well, actually, he's not dismissed by Prince Humperdinck, but by King Lotherin's wife, is asked to aid Wesley, Inigo, and Fezzik on their quest for vengeance. In the process, they are introduced to his wife, Valerie, whom he calls a witch. We are told that this is simply good for business, as a miracle man must have and a witch assistant. However, it is also clear that Valerie is his wife, the normalizing of such instances is clear evidence of a misogynistic misogyny. Say that. Why can't I spell this word? Oh, Mr. Fowler, misogyny. There we go. Misogamy. Oh, it's N, misogyny. Okay. Well, it's still wrong. Okay. Review. Misogyny. There it is. All right. And now we just have space to deal with. Additional instances of physical violence directed toward Buttercup during Wesley's rescue are also simply brushed or taken for granted, taken as a matter of fact. Obviously, tense situations make characters more prone to extreme reactions. But the love Wesley professes to have for Buttercup is certainly put into question. And I'm going to pause here, and I'm going to center and use a single space for this next section. Let's see here. Okay. So here's this instance from page 168. The prince and I have never, from the beginning, lied to each other. He knows I do not love him. Are not capable of love is what you mean. I'm very capable of love, Buttercup said. Hold your tongue, I think. I have loved more deeply than a killer like you can possibly imagine. And then he slapped her. That is the penalty for lying, Highness. Where I come from, when a woman lies, she is reprimanded. So this is an interesting exchange between Buttercup and Wesley. Okay, and then we're going to block this. Oops, sorry. And look at this. Boop. And then, of course, we will get rid of that period and put down page 168 as that's the citation that it comes from. Close that and put a period there. Okay. And now we have to provide some commentary. While it is likely, or while it is possible, that Goldman wants to create a tragic scene in which the two protagonists, not yet aware, or let's see here, in which the two protagonists are not, having been separated for 3 years, are no longer as conscious of their feelings as they once were, as they once had been. The fact remains that Buttercup is physically accosted or expressing her views. Double that. Whether whether or not, or let's say despite being a potentially realistic reaction, it is still an instance in which a woman is subjected to physical harm, to allow the ego of a man, of a male character, to be propped up. This is then a clear example of the kind of misogyny. Why am I having such a tough time for this? Misogyny. Misogyny. Of the misogyny rampant in 20th century media. Okay, so here we're on 4 pages. We got, look at that, 1,000+ words. And we're ready for our summation. And we can make that a short one because, like I said, we're doing just fine with our time and space. Clearly, Goldman is writing from a misogynistic perspective. His female characters, while given agency, tend to be the recipients of verbal abuse and sometimes even physical violence. Perhaps he was writing in a fashion that tried to apply medieval standards to a postmodern telling of a fairy tale. Perhaps also, by contrast, he was simply venting through his art in a manner similar to many of his male peers. In any event, the evidence left on the page leaves us with a single conclusion. Comma after that, because you have a introductory phrase composed of a preposition, which starts with the preposition any and ends with a noun form event, which means there's a comma that must follow it. In any event, the evidence left on the page leaves us with a single conclusion. The Princess Bride is reflective of tainted, misogynistic. Hey, I got it right. Oh, almost. G-Y-N. I just missed a typo. Of tainted, misogynistic writing that is all too normative in 20th century texts. And I'm going to highlight this and make that italicized because the titles of books, magazines, and films are italicized in writing. This big block quote I think is appropriate for what I'm doing in this paper, but it's one of those issues or matters of do as I say, not as I do, and I say you should probably avoid these unless you're trying to deliver a very specific kind of idea. And I think it should be centered. No, I think it's blocked. It's block. It's a block text. Is that what this is? Yes. Okay. There we go. It's a block text. So we have that exchange. We can also make it a little bit smaller since it's a block text. We could make it like a size 10 or something like that to set it off a little bit from the initial text. Okay, so that works a little bit. So now we have, we can go to a works cited page. And we have the Princess Bride here, so we can say Goldman, William, period, the Princess Bride. And it's published by Harcourt, period. Harcourt, comma, 1973. And then we'll do this. So that's my edition. Your edition may be published by a different publisher or the original publisher, so on and so forth. So we've got his last name, then his first name, period, the title, italicized, period, the publisher, comma, and then the date of publication or the date of original publication, 1973. We then can go back and review whether or not Pauline Kael talked about the male gaze. And to do that, we simply go to our resource pages. So I'm going to go ahead and go to kish.edu. And I'm going to use our library resources to help us. Okay. So I'm going to use share and go to our library page. Now you've probably seen this before, okay, but just bear with me. Right here on your student home screen, you can hover over the menu option. And if you look down here, I think it's what? In terms of these drop-down menu boxes, it's the 1, 2, 3 is the third one, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 from the top. Dropping that down and scrolling down through the drop down list, the selection list, you can find about 7 links below the library link. If you click on that, you have a link directly to our library homepage. And as I said at the top of the hour, Carol Lubina, our librarian, is going to show you how to use all of these sources and how to structure the use of them into your research in order to get the most out of that process. So I'm actually going to stop here for today, and we'll return to that video, or we'll return to that paper next Thursday, about a week from today, and we'll finish off the design of the paper. But I hope that this was helpful for you, because it should shore up your writing experience and show you that you can write from a perspective about any different topic, as long as you choose the right methodology to be persuasive. I'll just say that I actually don't think The Princess Bride is a misogynistic book, but with good and considered evidence, I can use inductive reasoning to make a general premise, move to specific criteria, and support that overall idea to convince my audience, I think, to at least consider a perspective, even a perspective I don't necessarily share myself. So if I can do it, you can do it too. And we'll, like I said, we'll continue this not on Tuesday, but next Thursday. We'll finish off the book, or the paper, by creating a paper. Kind of feels like a book, doesn't it? We'll finish off the paper by creating some good source material that we can use to enhance our own thoughts and ideas. Okay, that's it from Mr. Fowler. We've gone over long, so just be aware that in terms of midterms, some of you have not been up to the tasks assigned. So, you know, you need to think about how you're going to turn that around for the second half of the semester. The majority of you watching this, I'm sure, have everything well in hand. So do check your grades this weekend. Everything's been updated to reflect your most current and accurate grade percentage. And until next time, this is Mr. Fowler wishing you the best of the rest of your week. And I hope to see you next Tuesday. Take care, everyone.